Hello, hello. We are joined by Steph Smith, who I will introduce shortly. So good to see familiar faces. Josh, I've seen you every day, so shout out thanks for coming. Roxine as well, so good to see you. I'm noticing, I don't know if y'all are noticing, but Steph and I have some matching surfboards. So, just staying on brand, stay on brand. Where are you located, Steph?
I'm near San Diego, so I was gonna say I just bought
Oh,
these just for this call.
nice. I think you might have the rack that I have is called the Rad Racks, unrelated to Rad
Yes,
Reads.
yes. Actually, I think that's what it's called.
Rad Racks, Rad Reads, potential growth opportunities.
There
So
you go.
San Diego neighbors. I'm in Manhattan Beach, and
Ah,
we'll have to talk about that because I think read that you've been to over 50 or 100 countries. So
yep.
I was not expecting you to be a stone throws away from LA.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not from here originally, but yes, this is where I'm living. And I'm actually even closer. I'm in a place called Encinitas, which is kind of like
Ooh,
even further up north, so
yes,
closer to
yeah.
LA.
They actually call Encinitas the Manhattan Beach of San Diego.
Oh, okay.
So little surf town. People walk around barefoot.
Yes.
Um, awesome. So we're just going to do a quick recap as people stroll in. So for you, Steph, and for others who are just joining us for the first time, this is the 10K Summit Day 3. We've got Steph today, and an hour after our conversation, we have Lawrence Yo from the blog More to That. You might recognize his kind of Tim Urban-y style of blogging, an incredible storyteller. And just want to shout out Jane and Marion, two of my colleagues, helping putting this all together. And so once today ends, so this is the last day of the summit, but guess what? Next Tuesday, we continue at 9 a.m. Pacific for the next 3 days, where we take all the insights from the guests and turn them into action. So we've got the 10K bootcamp where, here we're getting the inspiration, the wisdom, and then next week we're going to get the action, the implementation, and that's all free. You don't have to do anything. You'll just get the emails in your inbox. So recapping yesterday, we had another one of our so many mutuals, Anne-Laure Lecunf, and she had an incredible line about growing the pie. If you're not growing the pie, if you're scared of the pie growing, you're holding on to the pie, you're losing. That was a quote that really resonated, and I know something that resonates with your ethos as well, Steph. And then we had Dan Runcie from Trap It All. It was fun. We're talking about hip hop and audience building and gatekeepers, and how Megan Thee Stallion was doing things that don't scale by going to, like, setting up house parties across the country and attending them. So and then probably my favorite quote was when we both kind of came to it, we're like, you know what, James Clear and Lil Nas X are actually very similar, and they're like they're really really good at market research. So I'm sure all of these themes will come together. I will stop talking, and I want to introduce today's guest, Steph Smith. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me. And all of those guests sound amazing. And I loved the quote from Anne-Laure. I think it's so spot on that when you're too busy protecting something, you can't actually grow anything else. Your focus is diverted too much.
Yes. And so first, congratulations are in order. From Twitter, we all saw
Thanks.
that you're recently engaged. I believe it was that in Alaska.
Yes, it was.
In
Yeah, last
Alaska.
month.
Awesome. So huge congratulations to
Thank
you
you.
and your partner for this next chapter. So Steph, why don't you start us off for those of us who don't know you, who are unfamiliar with your work? How do you describe who you are, what you do, where you spend your time, what lights you up?
Yeah, I love how you frame that because I never quite know how to introduce myself. I'm Steph. Hi everyone. I work on a bunch of different things. Full time, I work at a company called HubSpot because they acquired the company I worked at before that, which I still work at, called The Hustle. So I lead their trends product, which is our premium product. It's a newsletter all about trends, so what's up and coming if people want to build businesses. And then outside of that, I have always been kind of tinkering or dabbling with my own projects. So initially I started with learning to code and building little products that I would launch on Product Hunt. And then I started writing. So I launched a blog, wrote a book at one point. Now I run a podcast. So it's kind of all over the place. But I think that's actually one of the topics that we'll end up talking about today. But yeah, and I've done, I guess, an array of things and continue to want to do that as well.
I love that. I'm curious, what did you like? Seems kind of irrelevant at this part of the conversation, but what did you study in college?
Chemical engineering. So it
Chemical.
is very much not utilized, or most of the skills are not utilized directly. Like I learned how to size pumps, or I did research in like many different chemical engineering fields and then ended up not doing that. But there are parallels, right? Like you learn how to test things, you learn how to have the scientific mindset. And so I think I did take some parts of it, but yes, I don't currently do anything in the chemical engineering field anymore.
I would relate. I was this computer science major, a very bad one. It was actually my worst grades were in my major, and my best grades were outside of my major. WordPress doesn't count as coding. I've never coded since college, but the principles of problem solving, of logic, of deconstructing things into different pieces and strategy, I feel like I use all the time. So along those lines, a lot of the our listeners today will be unfamiliar with the term maker. And this is a term, probably one of the ways you might describe yourself. I've seen you write about it and mention that on your blog. But what does a maker mean to you, for someone who's never heard that term before?
I've never been asked that. So, kind of riffing on the spot here, the thing that I consider myself, or the realm of reason why I consider myself a maker, is because what I think I do is go down these rabbit holes, go learn things, whether it's learning to code or about a particular topic that I end up writing about, and I produce something net new into the world, right? And something that I'm uniquely interested in, hopefully something that other people can learn from or use, or in some way, shape, or form improves their lives, which is why I don't think maker needs to necessarily be someone going and creating their SaaS product. I think that someone writing online, reaching a bunch of people, like they are creators or they are makers in some way, shape, or form. So I do think that, there's no concrete term and there's no binary like you're a maker or you're not. But I do think if you are going out there and creating things, if you're creating net new things and obviously like harvesting things from around you, I think that means that you're a maker. And that's why I would consider myself one.
Yeah. And I would encourage, thank you for sharing that. And I would encourage, I like the label for myself because I like to experiment. I like doing different things all the time. I would encourage everyone. I think Jane will drop it in, or she already has dropped in. Check out Steph's Product Hunt. And so again, for those of you who are not in the world of Product Hunt and digital products, it's just as I was preparing for this interview, it's just a remarkable body of work to just go through Steph's Product Hunt, because you will see online courses, websites, web apps, resource guides across all different activities. Like one of them is words that don't have an English, like a dictionary of words that don't have an English translation. By describing that correctly?
Yeah, words that not just with English, but words that exist in one language that don't have direct translations elsewhere, which I think is just interesting, because if you think about the background of that, it's like, what would cause that? And it's typically something that's really unique in that particular place, that occurs more frequently for them to have to create a word around it, a dictionary around it, versus other places that don't experience that as much. So I think it creates like a little window into that.
I love it. And I think like if you just scroll down Steph's Product Hunt, you're just gonna see this. Like to me, it's like a modern day artist, in that there's just this complete display of creativity and curiosity out there, and then things that are useful, creating things that are useful to other people. And I just share with you, Steph, which but one of the themes of this, whether it's James Clear, whether it's Rachel Rogers, whether it's Ann Lore, I mean, every single guest has said all of these projects started because it was something I was interested in. It was something that I was curious about. And how do you, so when you're starting these projects, do you, like, what goes through your mind? Like, I don't know if that's the language, the word project, I forgot the name, might be a good one, but, I mean, actually, let me rephrase. Let me take that question back. What's a project that you're considering starting now, or that you recently started, and walk us through the thinking behind, like, why you want to do it, how you go about doing it, what skills you need to do.
Yeah, so I think I'll kind of join the two questions, and I will share something that I'm debating working on and have been. It's been kind of a seed in the back of my mind for a very long time, which is this course that I want to create, which is around Excel or Google Sheets, which sounds very lame, but I want to create it more so as a game, meaning that someone comes in and instead of following a video tutorial that says, hey, this is how you do a VLOOKUP or this is how you format a cell, they're actually trying to accomplish a task within a spreadsheet. And as they accomplish that task, as they're moving forward, they're actually learning the commands or the shortcuts or how the program works. I'm a big fan in general of, I think, gamified learning versus other types of learning, which are more traditional. But the reason I'm mentioning this product, and to your question, like, why would I want to do that? Well, it encompasses a lot of the things that you said. So one, what is something that I really love? I love spreadsheets. In fact, if you guys go to my blog, you'll find an article that says it's called like an ode to Excel or something. So I love this thing. I've loved it for so long, and I want to share that love with other people. I see this thing that I've found really fascinating that I recognize that other people don't find fascinating. And to me, that's a gap where I can say like, there's something that I can provide value with that the world maybe doesn't need, but I think to some extent could use, right? So many people could benefit from that skill. Because I'm really curious about it, that naturally lends to something that I'm quite good at, right? You don't tend to be really, really excited about something if you're really, really bad at it. And of course, that's obvious, but that's really important because a lot of people think about productivity. I created a course around basically productivity recently. And I mean, the most important part of productivity is that if you hate something, you're never going to want to do it, no matter what productivity hacks you have. So if you want to go and create something, then you better enjoy it and be good at it. So those are two check marks. The third thing I think that's important is having the space to actually do it. And that sounds, again, obvious, but I think Jane actually copied in one of my previous articles, which is called You Don't Need to Quit Your Job to Make.
Yes.
Now, I think a lot of people
That's
put
a classic
themselves...
and the Rad Reads canon, by the way.
Oh, really? That's
Yes.
amazing. I think a lot of people put themselves in the wrong mental state. And what I mean by this is that they quit their job. They hear these stories about like high school dropouts and people raising a bunch of money and basically getting into a do or die situation where it's like, I need to create this thing and I need it to be successful. And there's pressure on it. Because I have a full-time job, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, I can kind of go explore my curiosities, and it can be fun and it can be on my own timeline and it can be in the ways that I want. I don't need to force it to make money immediately. I don't have to like juxtapose how I want to do it and then ultimately what may make the most money. I can actually just truly go about it through my lens of curiosity. And I think ultimately all of that will ladder up into making money, which it has. But I think that's the way that I pursue projects. And I will just kind of close this out by saying that a lot of people I see, whether it's in writing or other projects, approach it differently. And they ask the question, like, what will people love, or what do I think people need? And there's nothing necessarily wrong with those questions, because it is important to like see if there's a market there. But ultimately, the projects that you do that are going to be the most successful are the things that you know so well because you're so curious about them. You spent so much more time going down the rabbit hole than someone else that it's going to be amazing. And the same thing is true with articles. Like, most incredible articles come from people who have just been like thinking about something for so long in a way that other people haven't thought about it. And then they emerge from this pit of thinking and they have this really, intricate insight. And I think the same thing is true with products where it doesn't necessarily need to start out as something incredible, just something that you're really curious about and that can evolve over time.
I love that. One of our mantras over at Rad Reads is follow the fun. Right. And if you use fun as kind of a guiding principle, it leads to the second mantra is you don't want to compete with someone who's having fun. Right. Because if you love Excel spreadsheets so much, by the way, ginormous market for for spreadsheet love. I once saw a YouTube channel. I think it had 800,000 followers.
There's so many. There's so
many
to
use Excel.
Which, by the way, just one quick note on that, like to your point, most of the things that I've done and that I will continue to do, it's not like there's no one else doing it, which
Mm,
is another thing that I think people sometimes get wrong is they're like, let me go find something that no one's doing. Well, if no one's doing it, maybe you're the first person to think of it, but more likely there's no market for it or there's a reason that it doesn't work.
mm,
And something that I think is just more important is to like go find something. Doesn't matter if people are already in the market, but as we were just talking about, that you're incredible at, that you can see like a unique spin to a
mhm.
differentiator, and then go do that and don't be afraid that other people are already in that market.
Yeah, that I absolutely love that, and that jives with a lot of what James said. Right? Is so many people have written books about habits, but what is it about atomic habits that set it apart from the rest? Let's stick with the spreadsheet example. I think it's so cool. I can't wait to play with it. I love spreadsheets too. Small fact. I hacked so many spreadsheets to make them act. This was actually one of my side projects when I worked on Wall Street. I wanted spreadsheets to act like databases. And this was before Airtable came out. And so I basically hacked Google Sheets to basically act like Airtable using like very convoluted if statements and VLOOKUPs and all that stuff. And then when Airtable came out, I was like, oh, for people who associate me with Notion, like Airtable was the precursor. Like Airtable was like the first love because it really took that energy that I had for spreadsheets and made it into the product that I wanted to see in the world. But I digress. Coming back to your this project, give us, if you could, like, I know it's all intuitive to you, but if you could distill the different skills that you think are necessary for this new spreadsheet project, what would they be?
That's a great question. So obviously this is probably a little more clear to me today than when I was first creating products. It was like all over the place. I would just like go hack something together, and then at some point I'm like, oh, I guess I should launch this, and then you'd like bring in marketing, and it was all very convoluted. But I would say that the key essential skills that you need for this product, for a spreadsheet, like a spreadsheet course or game or whatever, are very, very similar to anything that you create as like in an independent maker, which I call like, I can't remember, it's like 4 or 5 just really essential tech skills. They're all not development, because tech is not obviously just coding. But I would say if you can have a basic level of analytics, right? Marketing, design, and then within marketing, by the way, I include things like copywriting and then development. The development thing is kind of like, it's something I feel strongly about that everyone should learn, but of course there are no code options. But if you can have those roughly 4 things
Mhm.
and have a baseline where you're like quite good at all of them, and then you're amazing at 1 or 2 of them, you can create a product like this. And maybe you might have to outsource certain parts of it, but you may not even need to, which is why, like in the case of this product and my prior products, I've just built everything on my own. And the reason that I say those 4 things is because something that I think we'll get into later is just like this idea of um, being really solid throughout your career, being able to continuously
Mhm.
learn and grow. And I think ultimately what we should all be doing is asking ourselves the questions, like there's so many skills out there to learn. What are the skills that are absolutely going to still be around in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? They may look slightly different, but
Mhm.
what skills can I invest in today that I know will be useful tomorrow and in the future? And I think, to get back to the Excel spreadsheet one, like literally as long as I, starting with this spreadsheets, know how to create that, and then I can
Mhm.
bring in my marketing skills and understanding of things like how to actually market it in terms of design, understanding as part of the actual design of the game how to get people
Mhm.
to want to continue using it right throughout the game. That's why
Yes.
I'm incorporating gamification, development. If I end up creating a site for it,
Mhm.
great. And analytics, I think, is the one that I threw in there as well, because
Yeah.
if you're creating anything on your own, you need to understand how things perform, how to run tests, experiments. We talked
Mm.
about like those baseline skills that we learned from way back in
Yeah.
college. All of those come together in different ways in a product. And that's why if you really go into creating a product, like even if it's an Excel spreadsheet course and you only know spreadsheets and you don't know marketing or design or any of those
Mhm.
things, even at like a beginner level, you're going to really struggle to
Yeah.
bring a product together. And so those are the again, I can't remember if it's like 4 or
Four.
5, but like
I
4
love.
things that I think are like the if you heard of the T-shaped employee, that's basically what I'm describing.
Oh, no, I have, but say a little more about it.
So, a lot of people in their careers, I think especially more traditionally, would be I-shaped employees. There's a couple other shaped employees, but the two main ones that I'm familiar with are I and T-shaped. I-shaped means that you're just a killer marketer, a killer developer, killer something, which is great. Like, good for you for building up that skill, but you become so much more powerful as a T-shape, which basically just means, like, imagine a T, there's a base of these skills that are transferable so that you can work with other people, but also so that you can just like build up these products on your own. And then part of that T, like the vertical part, is what you're amazing at. So for me, I would say that I'm like a T-shaped marketer. So I think my expertise is in marketing, but then I know how to code, I know how to design to a decent degree. I am pretty good with analytics. So
Yeah.
I'm just so much more powerful with that base than if I only truly knew marketing.
Yes, I love that. So analytics, this I'm learning a lot here just as you talk. Analytics, marketing, design, and development. And if I think about my post Wall Street, so my Wall Street career, I was on Wall Street for 14 years, was the most I-shaped career ever. I could tell you everything about automated trading, right? But in hindsight, again, you don't realize these things when you're in it. In hindsight, though, it was actually quite T-shaped because I loved being a manager. I loved selling. I loved like being in the pitch room. Like I wanted to like get new clients, and so there were like flashes of T, but really my JD was to like understand this tiniest sliver of the market. Then if you flip into my RADREADS career, again, I didn't know what I was doing. I still don't really know what I'm doing 6.5 years later, but it's totally T-shaped. And I would say anchored around marketing, right? If you think of the RADREADS newsletter, this summit, positioning the course, you have all these elements of course design and design and things like that. But at the end of the day, it's like, can you get people to care? And then obviously you have to deliver. You have to, in my mind, you have to over deliver. But I love that. Analytics is actually a new one to me. I kind of suspected that, but I don't like it. But I see the importance. So I'm so excited for all and I really want, because we have a lot of careerists, people who are working at companies. By the way, let's just step back. Let's let it not be lost upon us. Steph has a full-time job at one of the largest marketing SaaS companies in the world, HubSpot. So if you're sitting here listening to Steph be like, well, I'm not in your world of making and product hunt and tinkering and coding and all of that. Don't get it twisted. Steph's got a full-time job, and so to me, and I say that not as throwing any shade, but as inspiration, right? That you could just jump into this talk and say, well, this person has so much free time and like blah blah. And I want to hear your thoughts on the 40-hour work week. But again, these are the seeds of planting new skills. These are the seeds of experimentation. These are the seeds of creativity. These are the seeds of business, if that's what you want. And we are so lucky to hear Steph just like describe it so casually, like, yeah, I just like come home from work and I'm gonna work on this new app.
Well, I think on that note, this relates exactly to what we were talking about earlier, which is curiosity, which is if I was forcing myself to work on projects that I was not interested in, I would not develop these skills because I would not want to show up every day. And because I have my financial stability through HubSpot or through my full-time job, wherever it was throughout my journey, I was able to just like come home and dabble, right? I was able to just like explore things because I wanted to. I was like, I really want to create this directory of untranslatable words because that excites me. And the other thing is most of the time when you work in a larger company, I've worked in the full range of companies now. HubSpot's my first go at like a large public company. The larger you get, the more I-shaped your role tends to be. That doesn't mean you as a person needs to be I-shaped, but it makes sense. As a larger company, they need you doing something very concrete because they don't need you doing like 5 different things. They have people for those things, and they need you to be an expert at what they hired you for. When you work at a smaller company, I've worked at a company as small as around 10. In that case, they need you to be I-shaped, or sorry, T-shaped.
Yeah.
If you're I-shaped, they're like, no, I need you to like, every so often like figure out the analytics on your own, because we don't really have like our CTO to help you figure that out, or a CIO, whatever it is. It's important for you to be T-shaped at a smaller company. And the smallest company that you can work at is your own projects, right? And that's why if you do go dabble in creating an app and you've never done any marketing before, you've never done any design before, I can guarantee you just going through the full process of creating a project from scratch and launching it, you will learn at least like a small degree of that baseline of your T, because it's impossible not to. You're going to need to design your landing page. You're going to need to launch your thing. And at first you won't be good at all of those things, but as you launch more and more things, you're going to become T-shaped almost inevitably if you are working on your own projects, because again, that's like the whole like company of one idea.
Yeah.
You need to be T-shaped if you're a company of one.
Absolutely. And so and I see people asking questions. We're collecting the questions and we'll leave 15 minutes or so for a Q&A. So if we bring this all together, right? So you've worked at big companies, you work at a big public company, you worked at tiny companies, you've started companies and projects. We've already talked about it without calling it, explicitly calling it out, but what do you think makes for an anti-fragile career? And I want to specifically, because I know that there are people in the audience who are lawyers and they're sitting here and saying like, none of this relates to me. By the way, Rachel Rogers, case in point, that even if you're a lawyer, digitized legal services was her gateway out of law, or finance or consulting. But what do you think are kind of how can one inject anti-fragility into their career?
Yeah, so if people aren't familiar with the term like anti-fragility or being anti-fragile, it's from Nassim Taleb's book. And it's this idea of, I'm literally quoting it because I have this down here. It's beyond resilience or robustness. The resilient resists shocks and stays the same. So that's resilience. The anti-fragile actually gets better. So if something hits the system, an example, for example, is the world becomes so automated that a bunch of people lose their jobs. So resilience resists the shocks. The anti-fragile gets better. So imagine that you are a lawyer, but on the side, you've been creating projects for fun. And throughout those projects, you've been learning to automate, or throughout those projects, you've been learning to code or learning to design or learning these technical skills. When that shock hits the whole job market and a bunch of people lose their jobs, you're not only in a place where you still have a job, but you can, build a stronger business. You can actually build a new business where you train those people who have lost jobs. Like, you're in a place where you are not only just like, holy shit, I still have a job, but you're actually like, oh, wait a minute, like I can do something here. I'm actually stronger due to some of these shocks to the system. And I think, as simple as it sounds, the key of this, I saw some of the comments on Twitter being like, you like having an audience and all these things, but what's the precursor to having an audience? The precursor to having an audience is having a skill set that other people yearn for. And the reason that people yearn for something is because it's in demand. So the key thing to anti-fragility, as simple as it sounds, at least within like the job market, or making sure that you have a career and that you will have a career in 5, 10, 30, 50 years, is constantly learning in the areas that you see the world moving. Again, sounds really simple, but that's this idea of, if you truly believe that the world is becoming more digital and you haven't actually invested at all in learning to code, I personally think that learning to code or basic technical literacy will be just as important as like written or oral literacy that exists today in, let's say, 10, 20 years. And so what I guess I would encourage people to do is just to ask themselves the question, like, what are the skills that I think, again, will persist or grow in the next 10, 20, 30 years, and pick a couple of them. And even if you don't want to become that today, one, that may change, or two, that's okay. So for example, I still work in marketing. That's my, base, or that's my like vertical part of the T, but I decided to learn to code because I was like, if I'm going to be truly anti-fragile, in addition to being a marketer, like I want to be able to participate in that new world. And even if I am never a full-time developer, I want to understand what's happening there. I want to be able to like again, work with people in that space, even if I'm not directly coding. And so I think the best thing that you can do if you're in one lane and you're just like cruising up that mountain is just to ask, like, how can I diversify my paths so that if a shock does come to the system, I'm able to, easily get up another mountain or traverse in different directions that I think a lot of people aren't ready for. They basically curated their life around one very
Yeah.
concrete path, and that's like the opposite of being anti-fragile. That's being incredibly fragile, where there are just infinite breakpoints that could
Mhm.
derail you instead of having a really robust system.
You keep coming back to coding, and I don't have a strong view other than I suck at coding from my computer science days 25 years ago. But I'm intrigued, and I've seen a few of the questions come back, like if someone, because there's two schools on coding, and I don't want to get too technical here, but there's kind of like the school that I'm in, which is the no code school, where you basically have an understanding of how components work together, and you can kind of stitch them together without ever writing a line of code, which is what we do at RADREADS, and it's a big part of our business. That's called no code. There are tools like Zapier that help you stitch these apps together. But if I, because I'm genuinely intrigued now, wanted to take that next step, like and follow your path in learning how to code, what would that be?
So, I mean, there's so many resources out there. The one
Yeah.
that I started with is it was called the Web Development Bootcamp. It's on Udemy. I think you can get it for $20.
Okay.
I would also say that's an important point. A lot of people go to formal boot camps to learn to code. That's completely fine. I would say the main differentiator between a formal boot camp and an online boot camp is just the accountability that comes with it. You can learn to become an incredible coder from just Googling things, but it takes that accountability and that initiative to do so. But I would also say, on your point of no code, I use tons of no code tools, but the most powerful thing is understanding how those no code tools work, right?
Yeah.
And understanding when to use them, when not to use them. The same thing is true if, even if you plan to never create your own products, if you end up going, and probably in the next 10 years, most products will be digital. If you want to create one and you want to hire a developer, you're going to be in so much of a worse place if you don't understand what you're hiring them for,
Yeah.
what they're actually doing. I've seen so many developers after I learned to code say things to me, and I'm like, no, that's not going to take 2 weeks. Like, I know
Yeah.
that's just a command. And I think it's important, if you recognize how important the digital world is becoming and will become,
Hmm.
why would you want that to be a black box for you? It's not about necessarily going and having your full-time job be as a programmer, but opening up that world so it's no longer a black box. And the same thing is true with no code, so that
Yeah.
you're not reliant on other people developing things for you, right? And hoping, oh, the next no code tool comes out. Instead saying, oh, okay, now I not only understand how these no code tools work, when I
Hmm.
need to circumvent them or when I need to create something outside of them, I have the power to do so, whether it's through my own coding or through hiring someone. But at
Yeah.
least if I hire someone, I understand what the hell is actually going on.
Yeah. Yeah. I could relate. I mean, just before this call, I was going back and forth with a designer and a developer, and I need to be able to just have the language to communicate an idea that I have, a vision that I have, into some kind of spec, and know that at the minimum, know that I'm not getting ripped off. Like
Yes.
that's like the worst case, but at the maximum, like to create, to truly communicate my vision into the ultimate practice. And I feel very strong. Design gets me way more excited than coding, so I've kind of leaned in
For sure.
heavier into design. But again, you've really made me think about, we've already hit our limits on some of our no code tools, and we're like, oh, okay, if we could just do this one little thing differently, but it's a black box.
Yeah,
So
if you don't know how it works. And I actually think that, by the way, if someone's looking for a product to build and this is within your realm of experience or curiosity, something that I maybe will build one day, and you're obviously welcome to build it instead because I'm throwing this idea out there, is like, most of the classes out there, most of the courses out there focus on, let me get someone from zero to becoming a full-time developer. I think there needs to be basically the same way that you learn to read and write as a kid. You learn how the internet works. You learn literally basic digital literacy, which means I bet you a lot of people in this call don't know what actually happens when you Google something. What information is being sent to the browser, which is then being sent to Google, which is then being like pinged back in it, and what data is in that request that's being pinged back and why, and all of those things. Like when you hit a 404 page, like what does 404 mean? right? And why is that being sent? And what are the other responses that you can get? And just how does the internet work? How, when I'm using an app, what is actually happening there? And if you can understand that, you may not need to build it yourself. But I think the same way that we see our parents, or at least I see my parents, and they struggle to send a text message, and you're like, how could you not send a text message? If we're not learning the basic literacy of what's happening on the web or digitally around us, we're going to end up in the exact same spot, right? And so I do think it's important, whether there's no code tools or whether there's supplements for learning to code. I think we put ourselves in a really, really vulnerable situation. We talked about being anti-fragile. I think the opposite of anti-fragile is fragility or vulnerability. And you put yourself in that position if you're not keeping up with at least understanding how things are working around you.
Yeah. Well, y'all heard it first, right? A seasoned maker giving you the toolkit and the idea and permission to run with it. So I know that of the 55 people listening, that there's someone that is, there's someone who's intrigued and someone that's like, I need to do something. I need to start a project. I need to do something different. There you go. You heard it here. And of course, I mean, it's unsurprising, but even I'm surprised to hear, of course, a web, like front end web development course costs $20 because it's free on YouTube if you're willing to go comb through the videos. So it should cost that little. So I want to pivot us to another part and leave room for questions because I see there's a lot popping up. But you managed when you were at TopTal, is that how you pronounce it?
TopTal, yeah.
TopTal. When you were at TopTal, you managed, I believe, a team of 20 people. Within your 3 years of being there. And one of the 10K ideas is human capital, right? Is like attracting, engaging, retaining, inspiring other people. And in classic, and I encourage you all to visit Steph's blog, in classic Steph form, she went down a rabbit hole of leadership. So what did, we'd love to hear kind of what became your principles or philosophy of leading and managing, large, also fully distributed teams?
Yeah. So one of the things that was really important about when I started leading a team, where yes, I was leading a 20-person team. That was my first time leading a team as well. And I was also, I want to say 23, maybe 24 max when I started leading that team. So it was completely new to me. And I think that actually played to my advantage in the end, meaning that when I started out, I was absolutely like, I don't know what I'm doing. But part of that, I think, is one of my now principles of leadership, which is that most of the time people will read these articles and it'll say like leaders must be confident. Leaders must be able to make quick decisions. And like there's all these like things that the internet tells you, or even as you're going through your career, other leaders will tell you like this is the quality of being a leader. And what I found was a lot of that was not accurate. In fact, the couple things, I'm just pulling it up now, there was 3 key things that I think are extremely important. So the first one is having humility, the second is scrapping any agenda, and the third is leading through influence. And so I think this idea of humility is really important. So if you imagine a 2x2 matrix, and you can actually see all of this in this one article that I wrote it about, there's a 2x2 matrix of ability and confidence, right? And so if you have ability and confidence, that's not rude, or it's not like being a bad leader. That's actually humility. You know where you lie on the spectrum of capability. And your impression of that is accurate. The same thing goes where if you're lacking an ability in a certain spot and you also lack the confidence in that, that's also humility. You know, again, where you're lying, and you have an accurate representation of reality. You're not trying to skew that at all. Now, if you are really capable, but you lack confidence, that's when you are doubtful. That's what a lot of people say is like not a good leader. And I do agree, if you're constantly doubting yourself when you do have the capability, that is when like people like lose trust in you, and they're maybe less so trust, but lose confidence in you as well. But the worst spot, I think, is where I see a lot of leaders where, again, you get told this, be confident. Like if you're not confident, how will your team be confident? Is when you are confident, but the ability doesn't match it. And I call that delusion. So if you really aren't great at something, and this is where I think, again, being kind of new to it helped me, is I was able to really, really clearly say, like, guys, I don't know what I'm doing in these areas, or like, can you help me with this? Or I think we should do it this way, but I'm really not sure. Like, I need some feedback. I need some help with this. That is where you leave delusion and you go back into this like humility spot, which people resonate with, right? They resonate with people who have humility, whether they're are capable or competent or not, right? They resonate with someone being like accurate in their representation of themselves. They're able to personally reflect. So I think that's actually one of the most important aspects, is to really reflect on where you're competent and where you're not, and not trying to have this like impenetrable layer of confidence, because I think we've all been there when a leader is just constantly exuding confidence but not always matching it with
Mhm.
performance or their skills, and that can really, I guess, upset people. It certainly has for me. The second thing, I'll go through the other ones really quickly. The second is dropping any agenda. This is obvious. This is classic leadership advice, but basically, like, once you become a leader, your goal when you're an IC is to progress your career. When you become a leader, that needs to switch to no longer progressing your career, but progressing the career of anyone that you're managing. And then the third is leading through influence. This is something that I think is so important, because there's something strange in the workforce, which is that you start out as an IC most of the time, and you're progressing all of your skills. And then a lot of the time, there's not really a route for people to continue progressing skills and continue just being a really killer IC. They somehow end up migrating to management. But for some reason, there's also kind of like a binary divide between individual contributors and managers, meaning that managers tend to not really do as much. And I don't mean like not work as much, but they're not actually like getting their hands dirty. And I don't think it needs to be that way. And that's something that I've actively tried to change as a manager, is making sure that I'm still really, really under like getting into the nitty gritty every single day. And I think the key of what I'm getting at is that you as a leader, if you're, let's say someone, I would hate for this to happen, someone on your team got hit by a bus, if you couldn't the next day replace them in their role and do it well, then you're probably not going to be able to lead them very well, because you're going to just have a very misconstrued understanding of what they actually do, what's easy, what's difficult. And so if you are a leader, I would encourage you to go and be able to, when I say lead through influence, it's not just leading through like sheer, again, confidence, but the ability to actually say, like, I know how to do this job too. And like, I'm here to help you improve on it. If you can't do that, then I think that's also where there can be some frustrations, where people feel like you're just telling me what to do, but you don't actually know what I do, or you don't
Yeah.
actually have experience in this realm.
Yes. And I'd say, for one thing, for some of us, we've had a bunch of talks on small business owners and solopreneurship. That's probably the one advantage solopreneurs have going for them, is they literally did every single thing before
Right. Yeah.
before the person got hired. On this theme, I love your rants, because I share them on the 40-hour work week. And
Oh, yes.
I would imagine that they translate also into just kind of how work is done in the majority of the world right now. But on the flip side, you have a full-time job, and
I
you
do.
seem to have you seem to have designed an anti-fragile career, that you don't need that specific job. You have chosen to stay in that job. Again, I might be being a little presumptuous, but I doubt
No,
it.
no, no, that's accurate.
And so what are your biggest pet peeves about how work is done today? Not wherever we are in the pandemic, hybrid / fully remote. So what are your biggest pet peeves about how work is being done today?
Yeah, so I have so many strong opinions about work, because I think it is one of the areas. Well, one, let's acknowledge how much time we spend at work, right? So a third of our life we spend at work. And there are so many traditions with work that no longer need to be true. And this is what I mean by that. So traditions exist for a reason, or you could say narratives is kind of synonymous to that. But there's all these things that we do in society, whether it's that we have a 7-day week, whether it's that we eat 3 meals a day, whether it's that we work a 40-hour work week. There's all these narratives that exist in the world that we all prescribe to. Now, some of these make sense, and they continue to make sense. Whenever they were invented, there was normally a cause for it. Like, if you actually go and research these things, which I would encourage you to do so you understand why we do so many of the things that we were just like taught to do as we grew up. Go learn about how 3-day meals started, why breakfast was a thing, why it was a thing in some places but not others. Go learn about these things. Go learn about how the clock works and why we all orient around the same thing, right? And so go learn about those things to understand why they came to be. And then in some cases you realize, yeah, like all of the reasons that this was invented still make sense. And therefore, like, why would we change it? But in some cases, if you get to the root of why something was created, you then realize that those same reasons no longer make sense in our current society. And the 40-hour work week is one example where I see that to be true. And if you go back, go learn about the 40-hour work week. People used to work in factories. In fact, they used to work 6-day weeks for 60 hours plus. The 40-hour work week was an improvement to that, developed, most people attribute it to Henry Ford and his factory. And so having the 40-hour work week was a breakthrough in that way. But that happened 100 years ago. 100 years ago, before we had cell phones to connect with each other, before we had incredibly fast internet, right, all around the world. It's before we had the ability to distribute our companies all around the world. It's before we had literally every piece of technology that we use today. And so the fact that we continue to work the same way despite having incredible advances in technology is insane, and it's all because of inertia from my perspective in this particular narrative, where it takes a lot of movement, like, it's directly from physics to stop something from moving, right, to reverse its direction. And the same thing is true when you have 7 billion people working around the world. Of course, not everyone prescribes the 40-hour work week, but when a majority do, it's really, really hard to stop that train and change the direction of it. And I think one important aspect for people to understand is a lot of people think that sometimes movements are started by humans changing their minds on things. So even when I've been working remotely since 2016, 2015, 2016, and I remember for years before, obviously most people were kind of forced to do it through the pandemic, people saying, oh, just like nomads are kind of lazy, or they don't want to work the 40-hour work week because they just want to live like a really chill life and all this stuff. And there was all these narratives again around like why someone trying to break away from this other narrative, why they were trying to do that. The important thing to understand is that, again, it's not those shifts in culture don't happen because humans wake up different. It's because of the way technology changes. So, for example, the reason that podcasts are booming right now is not because all of a sudden people are interested in audio. It's because it's so much easier to create a podcast and easier to listen to a podcast through things like AirPods on the go. So that expanded the time that people could actually spend with audio. The same thing is true with, again, remote work. It wasn't because one day in the 2000s, people said, I really need more flexibility. People always wanted flexibility. They just didn't have the means for that flexibility. They didn't have the ability to communicate seamlessly through a Zoom call like we're on right now. They couldn't do certain things. And therefore, once they had that, there's all this inertia pushing back on it. But technology at the end of the day ends up changing behavior, which is why we're all here today working remotely. And so I would encourage people to think through, like, again, learn about the narratives, learn where the 40-hour work week came from, and just ask, like, does it still make sense for us to be working 5 days a week, 9 to 5? And my conclusion from that, from my own assessment, was no. And it was the same assessment I made when I decided to go remote 5, 6, whatever many years ago, because I was like, no, actually, I have the tools to live the life that would be just as productive, in fact, more productive, with the things that we have today, instead of just prescribing to some narrative that made sense at some point, but no longer makes sense anymore.
Yeah. So when you look at a company to go work for, if you were to start a company of your own, what would be some of the non-negotiable kind of as it relates to the structure of work for you? Obviously, like fully remote would be
Yeah.
one of them.
Yeah. So ever since I started working remotely, that has been the main non-negotiable, is having flexibility in work. Another one, which I know is harder to find, but the ability, as you guys have seen, I work on my own projects, the ability to work on my own things and not have that be
An
counter to
issue.
what
Yeah.
what the company wants. And then something that, this is hard to screen for, but something that I really value, that I'm lucky that HubSpot is a big supporter of, is more asynchronous work, because it's hard to kind of screen for that. Like, how asynchronously do you work? Like, how many meetings are you going to have? I could not work at a company that had nonstop meetings, and those were mandatory. And they were, again, most of the time when you have meetings, they tend to be all around the same types of hours. And therefore, you kind of, even if you're a remote company, you end up migrating back to the 40-hour work week, even if you
Mhm.
have quote unquote flexible hours, if you are if you are really
Yes.
synchronous.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Something we've been spending a lot of time on at Rad Rates as we grow is truly being asynchronous and completely dropping all of those like you said, if you have a Monday morning meeting, at 9 a.m. Pacific every Monday, you're not, you kind of still like you put lipstick on the pig, versus wondering if the 9 a.m. meeting could be replaced with something else, with something more asynchronous, some kind of living document, some kind of behavior change. So I love that. And actually, I'm always amazed because people like you and I take a tool like Loom.com, I think it is, or use Loom, it used to be. But I'd be surprised. I would say that probably a third of the people on this call have not heard of Loom. And so things like Loom make asynchronous communication so seamless and easy and dare I even say delightful,
and more effective as well.
Effective.
That's the other thing. I know Clubhouse was like, I don't even know what the latest on Clubhouse is, but it was taking off several months ago, and I remember saying, well, one, not really understanding it in the sense that, sorry, that's the train, but not understanding it from the perspective of, I was like, this is so much lower quality kind of production or content than I'm used to, because if you create a podcast asynchronously, you have to spend the time, you as the creator has to spend the time to make sure it's good enough for someone to want to listen. When it's synchronous, that ownership or onus is put on the listener. And the same thing is true when you work synchronously in a company. I find, at least, when you jump into a meeting, no one's prepared, no one's thought about what we actually need to accomplish, you end up wasting half an hour or an hour. When you work asynchronously, it puts the onus on you to make sure that you've thought through what you had to think through, and that your requests or what actually needs to be done is also thought through. So you end up working in a way where you're like, okay, we're getting things done, we're actually progressing things. And yes, to your point, a lot of people, even myself on my team, I kept pushing my team to like, hey, instead of like us jumping on a call, could you send me a Loom? And it took a lot of, we talked about inertia, there's a lot of friction to change our habits. Synchronous is habitual because we've done it throughout our entire lives. It takes a lot of work to switch that, even if it's optimal, to asynchronous, but it's worth it because it's so much more intentional and effective once you get there.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. So we're going to open it. We're going to save the last 8 minutes. I mean, I told Steph earlier, I had like 4 paragraphs of things that I didn't even get to ask. But that just means we'll have to have a round 2. But we already have a few questions, but keep dropping the questions in the chat. I get them synchronously on my iPad, and I will relay them over. So our first question is from Marissa. What resources do you recommend for leveling up in the marketing area as a creator? Ooh, I want to hear the answer to that.
This is tough because I think marketing is sometimes misconstrued in the sense that it can seem kind of sleazy, and a lot of people focus on very specific aspects like SEO or copywriting or whatever it might be, product marketing. But I think the best ways that I've actually learned about marketing are twofold. One of them is through psychology books, because at the end of the day, marketing is getting people to care about something, right? So there are several actually one of the books that is a pretty good one on marketing is The Mom Test, which is kind of a bridge between marketing and psychology. But I'm trying to think of others. The Power of Habit is, no, that's not the one I'm thinking of.
Influence is one by Cialdini.
Let me bring up, I have a bunch of books that I recommend here, but I'm trying to think through which ones that have helped me specifically with marketing. Some negotiation books are helpful in that case. I would say learning more about just the way people think is important. And then I was going to augment that with the second part, which is testing. The best way to become a good marketer is learning through, I mentioned analytics before, but testing things. I remember my first job at TopTal in the marketing space was on the growth team. And I remember we were just running ads. I can't remember what platform it was on. And there was a bunch of images. And I remember thinking like, oh, I totally know what's going to perform. And there was one image that so vastly outperformed the others, which was definitely not one that I thought. And the key here is that you become a better marketer over time because you learn to see that most of the time you're wrong, and you learn to design really solid experiments, right? So you as a marketer never really get to the point where you know absolutely what's going to hit, but you learn to have a better intuition of what to test and how to test it, how to measure it. I was just noticing some of the really good books around, this isn't, again, marketing, but understanding how people think, are Everybody Lies. And what's the other one that's very similar to this? I think it's called Dataclysm. They're both really good books because they talk about Google searches. And they talk about Google searches, or I actually think one of them uses data from one of the dating sites. But the idea here is a lot of the time, a lot of the information you have out there is what people say they care about or what people say they're
Mhm.
thinking. But a Google search or something someone's entering into a dating app, their performance there is what they're actually thinking, right?
Wow.
And so you learn to understand, or I think it's just a really, those are two really interesting books to understand the differential sometimes between how you think people think, or how what even they think that they're thinking and what they're actually doing. So I guess those are two pieces of advice. And then of course, if you want to like jump into any specific forms of marketing, I would start by learning about each one individually. I think it can be way too overwhelming to say, I want to be a great marketer. Go learn about SEO. Go learn about really great copywriting. Go learn
Mhm.
about product. And marketing integrates with design a lot. So you can also just like learn about UX design. That's a form of marketing. And so I think that's my advice, I suppose, is mostly to learn about what people or how people think through
Yeah.
psychology, not traditionally through marketing. Go test a bunch of stuff through your own products. If you can do it at work, wonderful. And then, yes, if you do want to learn more technical marketing, like my area of expertise is actually in SEO, then go learn about them one at a time, because trying to learn marketing as a whole industry, I don't even know aspects of marketing. And so, yeah, I think I would approach it like that. Hopefully that's helpful to
Yeah,
the
that's
question Nessa who
super.
asked.
That's super helpful. And it actually jives with a question from Sarah. What advice do you have on being a creator if you aren't good? So you answer the aren't good part, or don't enjoy marketing. This is the one I like. What if you don't enjoy marketing?
I
What?
love this question. I'm going to pull up an interview I did with Product Hunt where I touched on this. But there's a couple key points here that I think this question, by the way, is asked a lot, right? A
Mm,
lot of people don't feel comfortable with marketing. I will rephrase one of the points, which is what I mentioned before, that marketing, I think a lot of the time is traditionally like you're imagining someone like post something in a Telegram group, or like saying, hey, everyone, like I launched this thing, and there's like a big Twitter thread, and they're very like outward, clear forms of marketing, and those can feel uncomfortable. Now, marketing, as a reminder, is just making people care about something, right? So that's why you hear people use terms like product led marketing, which means that you're actually building marketing into your product. You can make something viral. A great example is Poolside FM, right? Everything they do, they're not like writing these big threads about what they're launching, but they're making the product itself worth talking about. And I would say that actually leads to one of my second points, which is that if you there's a difference between feeling uncomfortable with your marketing skill set and feeling uncomfortable marketing your product. And what I mean by this is if you don't feel comfortable with your marketing skill set, you can go take a course, you can learn more about SEO, whatever it might be. If you feel uncomfortable marketing your product, and that means talking about it, it means getting it out into the right places, I would ask yourself why, right? And
mm,
again, there's a difference between like spamming groups, but if you have created something from the point of view of you being really curious about it, you thinking that there's a gap in the world, like with me, for example, I want to create this Google Sheets course because I'm like stoked to have other people learn about this. I will say that marketing comes a lot easier because you genuinely want people to know about this. And also, again, if you really do recognize or have created something to fill a gap, it'll feel more like a pull than a push, because
mhm,
people will actually be like, wait, tell me more about this. You figured out a way to like make writing a book way easier, or you figured out a way to like do X, Y, or Z. Like, I need this. Like, tell me about it. And then you'll also find that it'll be more of a pull because other people will be pushing it for you, right? If you've created something good that actually solves a problem for people, then the marketing, again, it's never going to feel 100% like not work, but it's going to feel a lot easier, a lot less uncomfortable. So I would also ask, I know it sounds like a simple question, like why do I feel uncomfortable marketing?
mhm,
Is it because of the skill set, or is it because I don't actually feel confident in what I'm putting out there in terms of it solving a problem, or in terms of me being really proud of what I've created? But
mhm.
let me try to find this post because I think it actually
And while
is.
you look for that, I'll just throw in, I felt that very much on the psychological side. I'm like, I want to be perceived as a good person. And I feel like marketing gives many people opportunities to say you're a bad person, especially when you're asking for
Yes.
money. Um, and so I take a slightly different tack. What I would say is like, be creative, right? Hate to break it to everyone. This is marketing, what we're doing right here,
Yeah.
but we're adding value. I'm having a blast. I hope Steph's having a blast. Y'all are learning stuff. But you know that there's a 10K framework, there's rad reads, there's an upcoming course, there's an upcoming bootcamp. Like that's marketing. It took me years to get to that place, to kind of find my own way of doing it. But I would encourage you to be creative as well.
Yeah, and part of it, like building in the open, it's a form of marketing.
Yeah.
You're not promoting your product, but you're, again, marketing is just getting someone to care about something. I will also say that even if it makes you uncomfortable, as I mentioned before, there are some key skills that if you learn them, they're going to carry you through your entire life. So marketing may look different in 50 years in terms of the channels that you use, but it will never not be important to get people to care about the things that you're building. And so one of the things that I think you actually alluded to earlier on, is that a lot of the people that you're bringing on to these sessions, like James Clear is an author, and Laura has done many different things. Like I'm not sure how she frames herself, but everyone that you know that is an incredible creator, and I'm not just talking about within our community. If you think about someone like Kanye West is one of the best marketers in the world. The people that you are most familiar with as the best singer, the best artist, the best X is not actually the best of any of those things, right? The best singer is hiding somewhere in some basement, like jamming out to their own tunes. The most well-known singers are the best marketers. The most well-known, NFT creators are the best marketers. Like all of these people are the best marketers, not the best creators. Hopefully, and most likely they are quite good at their craft.
Mm-hmm.
But if you truly want to grow your business, and it's okay if you don't, right? But I'm just saying that if you want to grow your business in some way, shape, or form, or have people care about your product, then there has to be some form of marketing behind it. And as you were saying, it doesn't need to necessarily be like really, really forceful marketing. Building in the open was a natural way for me at the beginning to almost market myself without it feeling like really, really pushy marketing, where I was just showing people, hey, I'm creating these things, and hopefully, other people are interested in them.
Awesome. Well, we are 2 minutes over. There's one quick question that I want to ask if you've got like 2 minutes, Steph.
Yeah, of course. I'm good.
What Shavana asked, obviously you're very productive. She says, any hacks you can share, but I'm going to reframe that in a 10K way. What's your top tip you would give someone to be as prolific and productive as you are? And by the way, go buy her course. She's got a course on this.
Well, I was going to say, so I'll post it in the chat. And if
yes,
you guys, I can also create a discount code if that's helpful for people in this group. But either way, the course covers this more in depth. It was created, as I mentioned before, I never create something because I'm like, oh, people, like, I think people will want this. In this case, tons of people had asked me the same question, whether it was on calls like this, like, how do you get so much done? And this was like my answer to that, like something that I had been thinking about for a long time. The super simple, like 1 sentence answer is calendar block the hell out of everything, block time off for what's most important. Because if you're not making time for it, it's never going to happen. The slightly longer answer is the framework that we discuss in this course, which I won't go through in depth, but it's basically in order to actually accomplish really, really impressive things that you're proud of at the end of your life. And that may be something like, raising a really balanced child. It doesn't need to be like career focused, is to really first eliminate what doesn't need to be coming along with you, then automate what can be automated, then delegate what can be delegated. And then only then you focus on what people think of as productivity, which is what we call iterate. So it's eliminate, automate, delegate, then iterate. And a lot of people skip that whole thing and they go straight to, they go, how can I get a faster XYZ? How can I get a better Mac screen grab tool? And it's like, all this stuff is going to be just like pennies compared to if you're actually eliminating as much as you possibly can that's non-essential, automating, delegating before getting to, again, that iteration stage, which just won't get you that far if you haven't done the precursors.
That's amazing, Steph. Steph, you are like incredible. The amount of wisdom dispensed in these 64 minutes is a thing of sheer brilliance and art. So on behalf of all of us, our community, thank you so much. This was really, just watching the chat comments. This was really incredible, inspiring, and also actionable, and just very real too. So thank you so much. You've got so many huge fans here. Thank you for the time today. Where should people go? We'll drop the link for the course. I'll get the code from you and drop it in the follow-up email so it hits like the whole list. where can people go find you? What's your main?
Yeah. So there's a bunch of links in here that other people have posted, but my main site is stephsmith.io. I'm most active on Twitter. My handle is stephsmith.io. And the one thing that I am actively trying to grow is my podcast. So if you found the things that I said interesting, then go check that out. I'll drop the link just in here.
And we'll put it in all the follow-ups
actually,
too.
that wasn't the, I feel like it needs to have the actual HTTP. It basically directs here. But anyway, it's called The Shit You Don't Learn in School. If you found this interesting, we talk about very similar topics there.
Awesome. Thank you, Steph. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much for having
We're
me.
going to go super existential with Lawrence Yeo in 55 minutes. He's such a philosopher. Like one of the big questions is why to-do lists are a reflection of mortality. So if that kind of thing is your kind of conversation topic, join us in 55 minutes with Lawrence. Thank you, Steph.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, Jane.